Captain America, Sentinel of Liberty, heads to the Forge in 1941, where Captain America's shield is created, as Steve thinks he knows all about war and how it twists the honourable into criminals and the cowardly into heroes. He knows of friendship and hate and the mission and the one that never ends, but he also knows devastation and love. Most important of all, he knows of the dream. In the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Steve heads to an apartment block, wanting to rent the apartment number 415. The landlord knows it's quite a rat hole, but it's a renovator's dream. Steve tells himself that he's been living in the mask and he's more of the Shield than Steve Rogers now, so with Sam out there as Captain America, he thought it was time to drop all of the bunkers and security clearances and remember what it was like to be a normal, everyday American. Steve meets with his new neighbor, a young boy named Amari, as he enters his apartment, knowing that this was the same apartment he grew up in back in the 1920s. He's glad no one knows he used to live there, otherwise it would be a museum, and unfortunately there is enough of his past that is classified and he can afford some privacy. Heading onto the fire escape, he knows that nothing is the same about it, yet everything is the same. Steve knows that this is where he belongs, as the next day he begins his routine, running a 32-mile jog around New York with his shield, knowing people always are more excited about the shield, and he's fine with that, since people shouldn't see him when they see the stars and stripes. They should see themselves. He knows his friends think that he does this for one reason or another, but Steve finds a peace and joy in the community, always pointing the shield towards the people to remind them and himself that the shield belongs to all of them. Steve heads for his first art class in community college, finding himself really struggling with sketching on a tablet instead of paper, as well as having to sketch a nude model, not wanting to look out of decency. Steve makes some new friends in Mia, David and Hudson, going to a baseball game and pubs with them. Steve finds that the past doesn't really stay in the past though, and often it repeats, as he finds Amari outside their building, having been bullied. Steve knows that he was bullied as well as a kid, wanting to teach Amari how to stand up to them. Steve returns home and chats with Radio Company, a group of veterans he communicates with over an old ham radio. The group know the 4th of July celebration is coming up, discussing if this counts as Steve's birthday as well. Steve begins to hear a series of numbers over the radio frequency though, with the others knowing that it's something new to the channel. Radio Company gets to work on figuring out what it is and quickly discovers its latitude and longitude bearings, a date and a message. Steve sketches out what he learns, finding that something is about to begin in New York on the 4th of July. Steve opens his closet and suits up, knowing that this part never gets old to him no matter how many times he's done it, knowing the heroes that followed after him didn't have Vita Rays to help, they had to forge something new and hope to God that it lasted. But he is lucky since he gets to armor himself in meaning and wield the dream and make it real. Captain America and Bucky head to the big 4th of July parade in the middle of New York, but Bucky doesn't think that something is going to happen, since there has been no signal in 7 hours. Cap doesn't want to take a chance, as Bucky thinks that there is a lot of people down there dressed like Steve, wishing his friend a happy birthday as he grapples up to one of the blimps, told by Steve not to get hit by a firework. Bucky rolls onto the blimp and knows he's better than that, and ninjas try to avoid him, and Loki even tried to trick him but ended up with a broken jaw in the process. Bucky tags an antimatter explosive signature from a fireworks barge down on the Hudson as Cap moves in above it, noticing who is on the barge. Bucky doesn't think it can be the person he thinks it is, since Roger would be 90 and Brian's been dead since 1953, so it has to be someone new. Cap knows whoever it is, they're going to regret it, as he spots the Destroyer. Cap remembers all about the Destroyer and how they once teamed up together, as he launches his attack on the villain, demanding that he stop the detonator, but the villain, while loving Steve's unlearned confidence, tells him that this is all bigger than him and he's crashing a celebration. He clicks the detonator as he blasts Steve with an energy beam. Bucky tries to shoot him, but his bullets disintegrate off his shield before they can hit the Destroyer. The villain tells Steve that it's too late for the city, but not for him, imploring the hero to run away and bear witness to the glory to come. Destroyer leaps up onto the blimp and confronts Bucky, apologizing for what he's about to do. Steve dives into the river and swims up to the shore of the parade as Bucky continues to fight Destroyer. Steve gets some of the partygoers to release their Captain America shield balloon as he runs across a rooftop, leaping onto the balloon as he tells himself that this Destroyer is young, meaning that he's new enough to the game that he hasn't learned the first thing about fighting Captain America, which is that Captain America will run, but not away from anything. Cap throws his shield at the villain as Destroyer finally hits Bucky with his laser, injuring the hero. The shield bounces off Destroyer's head and gives Bucky a chance to open fire, but Steve dives in front of him, blocking the bullets, wanting to take the villain alive. He smashes Destroyer's mask off as the man says that he failed to execute his move, which means he's a dead man now. Steve tells him to help him and tell him who sent him, but Destroyer whispers to him that the shield isn't what he thinks, and it's not Steve's symbol, it's theirs. Destroyer's head suddenly explodes, killing the man instantly. Steve finds the diamond shape on the man's neck, knowing what the man said was the truth. Later on, Steve heads home, thinking about whoever sent Destroyer put the boy's blood on his hands. He knows that if he's willing to take a hard look at where he came from and what he is wielding all these years and face whatever he finds, he knows he can wake up. Bucky meanwhile arrives home, telling himself that he isn't lost anymore as he draws out the star symbol from Steve's shield on the wall, marking off one of the diamond points and telling himself, with one down, there are 4 to go. Elsewhere, a man in green tells his friends that he appreciates their patience and they have waited some time. By the time they hear this, he will have won. He knows that he doesn't like to brag, but hopes they aren't too surprised that he actually won. He tells them the classic game is rife with pawn sacrifice, and that will be what they think he did, since they designed all of this off the classic game of chess, merely because they never learned to play checkers. The man announces that this was just his opening move, and while the 20th century was a draw, the 21st will be played for keeps, and the revolution will go forward into the future. 3 days later, Steve calls Bucky, hoping that he's okay since it's been 3 days since he last heard from him. He knows that things are tense between them because of the secrets between them, and he wants Bucky to give him a call since he wants to get out of the dark before it swallows them. Steve gets a call from Radio Company, told that they have another broadcast. Roger, the original Destroyer, tells Steve that this is the 4th one this week and they are still running it through the decoder they built, and the good news is that they aren't any more children stealing his mantle. He thinks that this is a unified theory to these codes, but no political power is capable of the moves these directives are ordering. John chimes in, saying that whoever these people are, they are playing on the battlefields of power, wealth, industry, and arts, and everything else. Steve doesn't think that they understand the rules just yet, but Roger thinks that it's all just a game of history itself. Pam reminds them that they can't punch their way out of a puzzle, however Steve begs to differ since he's seen some stuff. Roger gets the new signal decoded, not understanding what it means as it reads that someone has to secure the forge. Later on, Steve gets drinks with his college friends, apologizing since he's been in his head all week. Mia tells him that that's the burden of an artist and wants Steve to tell them what's on his mind. Steve fills them in on the attack the week before on the Hudson and how one of the bombers was just someone's kid who was twisted by people who didn't care if he lived or died. He tells them he learned something that shook him, something about the symbol on the shield not belonging to him but to someone else. He realizes that he never knew who actually made the shield, but Mitch has it sorted, looking it up on his phone. He tells Steve that a man named Dr. Daniel Agboje designed the shield, but most of his information is classified, and someone named Merman McLean did the actual industrial construction of the shield. Mitch can't find any more information, apologizing, but Steve knows it's more than they had a moment ago, surprised that he could do all of that with a cell phone. Mitch tells him it's Stark tech and wants him to thank Tony Stark the next time he sees him, as the group share a toast to friends. Later on, Steve shows Amari how to box, breaking the punching bag with one punch. Steve tells the boy that's all you'll ever need, one punch, which is why if those boys come back and pick on Amari again, he can hit them with a haymaker. Amari thinks he's too small, but Steve knows that no one is small on the inside, showing the boy how to stand and deliver the punch, telling him that it's his turn to break the bag. Amari hits the bag, but Steve tells him that he's reserving his power, wanting him to use it all in one strike. Amari thinks that it's like the Forge, which gets Steve's interest. Amari says that it's like a power station in Germany and his mother is an electrician and knows all about it coming online last week, and she won't stop talking about how it will change the world. Steve remembers the first time he ever heard about Germany when it was kicking the rest of the world's teeth in at the opening days of World War II. Steve heads to the Forge in Germany, thinking about these madmen who have made it their next target. He begins remembering of the times during war, remembering it being simpler times, but the more he learns of them, the more he realizes the secrets didn't begin when he came out of the ice. They were right there with him all along. Steve infiltrates the power station, finding a group of soldiers have taken the workers hostage. Captain America attacks the men, directing the hostages to evacuate as he spots one of the soldiers has a Hydra tattoo, the martial arts skills of a hand ninja, and the kinetic resistant fabric on his armor of an aim and counter suit, and it's all bundled together in the same suit. Steve heard one of the men call the agents tithed agents, realizing that whoever these people are, they are pulling pawns from every organization he's ever fought, and some he was even friends with, as a soldier comes at Steve with a knife with a shield symbol on it, telling Cap to stand down as Steve recognizes the man as former SHIELD agent Ortiz, who he has fought alongside before. Steve tries to get through to Agent Ortiz, demanding to know what he is doing working with AIM, Hydra, and the Hand. Ortiz says that they are all following orders, but Steve punches him down, telling him he can't stand men who just follow orders blindly. As the battle begins to go his way, a shadow passes above and Steve looks up, horrified to find a giant ship shaped like his shield. The 5 leaders aboard the ship vote yes for a redaction, and a pod drops down onto Steve, who says that if they want his symbol, they can come and get it from him. The pod turns into a monstrous soldier, which Steve deflects with his shield. Elsewhere in Madripoor, a sharply dressed Bucky punches his way into a high roller casino, apologizing to the people inside since he'll like to buy in. The shadowy dealer tells him his name isn't required, but his money is welcome all the same. She tells him the game is Baccarat, but Bucky doesn't care, telling the woman he's only there to find her. The woman implores Bucky not to do this, since he is blowing her cover. Bucky says that he's meeting her there in the shadows because that's where the real war is being fought. A war as old as both of them. He tells her of the 5 soldiers of the 5 points of the star, all fighting for one mysterious cause, and the woman, revealed to be Peggy Carter, is one of them, and Bucky wants to know who she is really working for. Bucky knows that back in 1944, when both he and Peggy extracted 2 scientists, one was an old friend of Peggy's and the other went on to make VX nerve gas, which in 1956 was traded by Britain for US nukes, adjusting the power scale on a global level. Bucky continues rattling off deals and missions that he knows changed the landscape of global power until just last year when Peggy was revealed to be running the Daughters of Liberty, and they took down the Power Elite. But all their resources suddenly disappeared into shell companies, and the Power Elite's power was just reconsolidated. Bucky demands to know if she knew it would happen, as Peggy asks if Steve knows where Bucky is. But Bucky knows that Steve is better off staying away, as Captain America meanwhile battles a monstrous machine, who tells him that he has been redacted, and history will not remember him. The machine attacks and Steve notices that it's made out of either vibranium, adamantium, or something stronger. He begins to feel exhaustion creep up on him through his shield arm, but he remembers a battle during World War II where he and his squad didn't think they'd outlast the Winter or the enemy, but they did, and with that, he knows he can survive this. Steve battles the machine around the power plant until a pipe bursts and lava pours out of it, covering the machine with it. Steve knows that this hurt the machine, wondering what this pipe was doing here since wind power doesn't create a lava flow, and this facility isn't some green-powered miracle. It's all a lie, one they didn't want him to see. The machine runs off into the building and Steve gives chase. And as he tries to find the machine, he remembers some wisdom King T'Chaka passed along with the vibranium used to make his shield. The first being the metal is his protector and he has to respect it. And the second is the metal is his teacher and he must listen to it. Steve bangs the shield on the ground using its echolocation to find the machine, which thinks it has lured Steve into a trap as it hides in the darkness behind him. The echolocation also uncovers a cable in the floor, which Steve strikes and electrifies his shield, smashing the machine in the face with it. The machine is weakened and instantly teleports away, but not before Steve knows that that's not a machine at all. It was a person. Cap continues on deeper into the facility and finds the forge, turning on the power to find the hidden facility under the power station. Can't believe that he found an honest-to-God volcano lair, and he knows that even while not active, it's still a dangerous place as he finds the mold which made his shield. Steve puts his shield in the mold and hears a click, and a message begins playing from Dr. Agboje, who knows that by the time Steve hears this, he'll either be dead or he'll have disappeared, but either way, Steve has just completed his mission. He says that he was tasked to construct the vibranium alloy forge, but this place isn't really run by the United States. He reveals to Steve who the Outer Circle are and how the world is their game. He tells him that their symbol is 3 rings around a star, with the Outer Circle being controlling, while the 2 inner circles are the ones that obey, and the star is their weapon, and in putting the symbol on the shield, the Doctor revealed them to the world. He tells him that Steve is their star and will wield the shield, and he hopes Steve won't accept his role as the pawn in this war they have orchestrated, since if they are allowed to continue, they will play a game with the entire century. The Doctor hopes that Steve is the man he thinks he is, the kind of man who fights for freedom and for the world and its people. He tells Steve to take the shield since it's not their symbol anymore.
It's his. A voice calls out to Steve, thinking that even after nearly a century, he still doesn't know his place. A hologram of a woman with many tentacles appears, refusing to reveal who she is, as Steve knows that she wanted to keep him from finding this message and she failed. The woman knows she did, but she has prepared a better move in response. Bombs planted around the forge explode as Steve makes his escape, told by the woman that her son, the doctor who made the shield, was an excellent judge of character. She bids Steve farewell, knowing that she can rebuild a power plant, but no one can rebuild Captain America. Steve leaps from the platform and rides his shield down the cascading lava flow, escaping the exploding plant. Bucky meanwhile tells Peggy that their confrontation doesn't have to go this way, but the woman refuses to help him, demanding everyone get out of the building if they know what is good for them. After the casino goers exit the building, Bucky tells her that he has proof of his claims about the Power Elite, but she doesn't care, not finding him charming before his defection, and she doesn't find him sympathetic now. She kicks the casino table at him, telling him that when he calls her a puppet, she takes that personally. Peggy opens fire on Bucky and both the agents shoot the guns from each other's hands, prompting them to fight with their fists and feet. Peggy refuses to be dragged into whatever tragedy Bucky has going, whipping some playing cards at him and cutting up his face. She kicks him hard in the face, telling the man that if he wants to live, he has to wipe her name from his imagination. Bucky tosses a roulette wheel at her, telling Peggy that he is trying to wake her up to what is happening, but the woman doesn't want to, telling him to shut up as she chops his neck and knocks Bucky out cold. She knows that if what he says is true, she'll find out herself and bring the Power Elite to justice. But until then, she doesn't want to see the Winter Soldier ever again. Back in New York, Amari continues to train up his haymaker in the boxing gym as one of the redacted machines comes out of the shadows, watching the boy as it says that he has been redacted and history will not remember him.
Sometime later, Steve mulls over his mother always saying that everything is in its right place. She'd always say that this was God's plan, but lately he's been wondering if God's plan was what his mother was fulfilling, or was it the outer circles? Bucky meanwhile tells his cat Alpine that while the Fisk file was one thing, these old redacted reports he dug up are so redacted they might as well just be printed on black paper. He hopes the cat has some hidden espionage skills as there's a knock at the door. Bucky tenses up and gets ready for a fight, but opens it to find Steve, who thinks he looks like hell. Steve comes inside and tells him they need to talk about their secrets. Steve fills him in on the outer circle and how they have been playing a game with the world since at least 1942. He reveals that the circle was going to use him when he became Captain America, but the man who forged the shield revealed them by putting their symbol on his shield so everyone can see them. He thinks that if this is true, then the entire world is on the shield and it's like a map with the outer circle surrounding them all, and if they step out of line, someone like the Winter Soldier is sent after them. Steve is somewhat shocked as his friend reveals that the outer circle has what they call star points, 5 assassins they use to make history plays. He reveals the destroyer they fought called Bucky the Great Century Weapon, and he didn't know there were others out there, thinking that he was alone in this fight. Steve tells him he's been his friend for 80 years and he should have learned by now that he never fights alone. Steve and Bucky make a plan to fight against this and swear to do it together, as later, Steve walks Amari to school. Steve asks the kid if he's excited to go back to school, and the boy is, especially since he's got the haymaker ready to show the bullies. Steve tells him not to show off anything, remembering how the day he learned to fight, he practically beat up every Nazi on the planet before dinner, but it was because he went after a fight, thinking that he was being a real hero. He knows it gave the bullies a bloody nose and taught them what he was capable of, but soon they too got their strength and struck back first. He tells the boy that violence isn't the tool, it's a cycle, and the more they feed it, the hungrier it gets, and eventually it will bite back. Amari asks why he spent all summer boxing then, so Steve reminds him that it's because if a fight does come for him, he'll be ready to stop it fast and hard, and he will tell violence that there is no place for him in its cycle, and he can focus on his future, since the boy's future is whatever he decides it to be. Steve bids the boy farewell as he heads to community college, where the art class sketches his shield. Steve asks his friends what the shield means to them, so David thinks that it means America, with its red, white, and blue stripes and star. Nia finds all that don't tread on me stuff nonsense, and Hudson tells her not to badmouth the American dream in front of Steve, but Mia thinks that Steve knows she's right since he's been fighting white supremacists longer than they've been alive. Steve thinks that is a symbol of corruption then, and Hudson thinks that it can be one of injustice, but also one of hope, and the others agree that it means that help is on the way, or it's a comforting smile, much like the one Steve is giving them right now. Mia thinks the real question is, what does it mean to Steve? Later on at the overall pub, Steve listens to Arlo White go on about change coming. Steve thinks that now the pub is home to the best argument in town, and what's more American than an argument? Steve debates with Arlo, who reminds him that this neighborhood was slave country, and after that filled with gangland mobsters, and then the Triangle Shirtwaist fire killed 146 workers, all thanks to some profit margins. Steve thinks that the law is there to square up reality and their ideals, so why doesn't Arlo let the system do its job? But Arlo doesn't think that he gets it, since the system didn't outlaw slavery or get rid of the mob or fix profit margins, the little guy did. Arlo stands on the bar, telling everyone and Steve that socialism has been part of this country since the revolution, and even Steve's military have it, since his needs are met and his pay is low, but Steve does something for the greater good, so it all balances out. Steve asks him what he's supposed to do, thinking he's going to shove it back in the face of the country and use it to disassemble everything he knows. Arlo finishes his drink and tells Steve that he can do with his power whatever he wants, and since he's a good man, he will use it to help people, since just because they made him doesn't mean they own him. Steve heads home, calling out to the redacted machine that has been following him this entire time. Steve tells him that he's lived long enough to know when he's picked up a second shadow, and its first mistake was getting too close, knowing that it was with him the whole day, and it didn't attack him when he was with Amari because he would be exposed. Steve tells him that it also didn't attack in the classroom, since that would both expose it and cause collateral damage. Steve knows that the machine's orders are to kill him and him alone, and now that he's alone, the machine can make its choice. The machine attacks and Steve dodges its blades and tentacles, knowing that the villain has been listening to everything he's been saying all day, hoping it's been paying attention because Steve has been talking directly to the machine this entire time. Steve reiterates what he said about his mother and the cycle of violence to Amari, knowing that the machine is really a person under the armor, and he knows that they can choose their place, and while it may have to fight for it, and if each of them have each other's backs, then they can stand free finally. Steve beats down the machine, ripping its tentacles off and beating it into submission, asking what place it chooses. The machine stops as Steve tells him that he's going to flip the table on the outer circle, and wants the machine to join him. Elsewhere, the Revolution finds that Starpoint R has gone offline, prompting him to call the table to convene. He broadcasts his move, which is wanting to get Captain America to the Shadow Capital, which will be his final move. The table later convene as the other members accuse Revolution of bringing Steve to the Capitol and burning it all down, wishing that he could get caught in the fire. Revolution says that he's trying to win this game, but the machine tells him to think of the long game. Revolution thinks the game is too long already, giving her a video to watch when he's gone. The woman isn't interested since Revolution is a failure and always has been, and he always goes off half-cocked, but all of this is just juvenile, even for him. She tells the villains that when he leaves, she will not weep for him or those who get killed in his name. Steve, Bucky, and Redacted Mimo are taken into the stratosphere by Captain Merrick's Freedom's Flight. Merrick hopes that Steve is sure the Shadow Capital is down there since a shield-shaped airship is kinda hard to miss, but radar isn't picking up anything. Steve knows that it's there, trusting Redacted's information. Bucky tells them that where they are going they'll need to be radio silent, asking if Steve has any last words. Steve tells his friend that they are doing this together and he has his back no matter what. Alarms sound and the three men base jump from the jet, skydiving a long way down before deploying their chutes and falling not onto the ground but through a cloaking shield which brings them into the Shadow Capital. Cap sends Redacted out, who begins blowing up the base. Steve tells Bucky to get ready since the Circle will send everything at them as a voice booms out over them, saying the heroes think that they know all about the star points and the tithes and their systems of power, and all around it is the outer circle. The 5 members of the Circle appear in giant holograms around Steve and Bucky, revealing their names to be the money, the power, the love, the revolution, and the machine, and the heroes have been tracking their century game. The group reveal that at the birth of the century, the world painted itself with blood and bone, and so they grew with the age and weave the story of the world, claiming not to control the world, but inspire it and bend it. The Power proclaims that the game of the 21st century has just begun, making his move, which is Captain America dies. Tithed agents surround the heroes and Captain America and Winter Soldier battle the men, intending on sticking to the plan. As they fight, Steve knows that him and the agents are practically the same, with the difference being that he isn't killing, and it's very hard not to when the bullets get flying, feeling it building in Bucky, but the way Bucky holds back has always amazed him. He knows Bucky has his limits though to this, as the soldier says that he's opening up on the agents now, now as another horde come in. Cap tells him not to as an agent confronts them, telling them that she will shoot them since they won't let her put the gun down. Cap is aware that the Tithe agent suits are rigged to explode if they put the gun down and disobey the outer circle, but she needs to trust Steve since she can put the gun down. All she has to do is try. The woman throws the gun down and nothing happens, telling the other agents the bombs are offline. The agent isn't sure how but thinks they got saved by Captain America, but Steve tells her that she saved herself and has someone else to thank for disarming the bombs as Redacted gets finished destroying the rest of the Capitol's buildings. Steve learns the woman's name is Stacey Armitage from MI-13, and he wants her to help the others get to safety. Steve and Bucky head for the central tower, spotting someone at the top. The heroes grapple up and pay them a visit, smashing into the window, only to find a darkened room with only the Revolution in it. The Revolution says that they just missed the others, but he's glad that they are there since he's been waiting for this confrontation for so long. He plans on shedding some light on why Steve Rogers was brought into the game, and he tells Bucky that the hero has been working for him his entire life, and if he wants liberty, he just has to take it. Revolution offers Bucky a pistol as Bucky reminds the angered Steve of the mission. Steve doesn't want to play this game, but Revolution states this isn't a choice, and James has had that experience on the board. But what he doesn't know is that he can sit at the table with them, and all he has to do is come there and do what he intends to do. Steve knows that Bucky won't kill the man, but his friend tells him to leave, telling the villain that he doesn't need the villain's gun. He brought his own, and it's all he ever thought about for months. Bucky reveals that he was chosen as a child and they set his father up to die, and for him to be adopted by the army and partnered with Steve, also he could get him to control Captain America. But all of the blood isn't his sin, it's the outer circles. Cap moves between Bucky and Revolution, telling his friend that he won't pull the trigger, but Bucky sternly tells him to get out of the way. Steve tells his friend that he isn't in his way, Bucky is getting in his own way, and he cannot give in to vengeance. Bucky puts the gun back up, telling Steve that this isn't vengeance, it's revolution, as he shoots both Steve and the Revolution. The Revolution is killed by the bullet, but Steve lives thanks to a shoulder wound, not believing what his friend just did, but he knows that he cannot let this go on. Bucky shoots at his friend's feet, demanding that he stand down and he'll get medical attention to Steve. Steve refuses to give up, telling his friend that his mind is flooded with vengeance, but he still knows enough to not shoot him directly, hitting his shoulder instead, and now he can brag to Sharon the next time he sees her. Bucky tells him to stop, but Steve knows that he got what he came for and now they can get out of there together, since even with a bad shoulder, he is still strong enough to drag Bucky home. Bucky tosses the gun away, telling Steve that the outer circle took everything from him before he even knew he had it, and the Revolution knew what the power he had did to him, and this isn't some problem he can just punch or talk down, and it's not a problem that's going to break because you plant yourself like a tree. He tells Steve that they need to destroy this problem from within, and he has a plan that will work, but Steve is in the way, and until this place is burnt to the ground, he is where he belongs. Steve refuses to leave his friend again, but knows that there is nothing left to say, so the super soldiers come at each other, savagely beating each other until Steve is thrown from the window. Steve grabs the ledge and lands on his feet, leaping from the tower as Bucky gives chase. Steve throws Bucky from the platform and Bucky responds by grabbing a nearby missile from Battery and tossing it up at Steve, blowing Captain America down into the airstrip and into a jet. Bucky continues his assault, ripping a jet's wing off and using it to beat Steve down. Steve asks his friend if he's done yet, but Bucky wants him to let go of him, or he'll make him. Steve's shield comes bouncing back towards behind Bucky, but the man grabs it and tosses it back at Steve, kicking him from the ledge of the Capitol. Steve grabs onto Bucky before he can fall, and tearfully, Bucky deactivates his arm, popping it off and causing Steve to fall down towards Earth. Steve lands hard in the ocean with Bucky's arm and shield, pulling himself to shore as on the Capitol, Bucky returns to the meeting room, smashing the table in anger for what he had to do before going to his quarters, retrieving a new arm and clothing as the Outer Circle talk about the Revolution's death, which was ironically done by a revolution. They believe a new revolution has begun, and while the player has changed, the game remains the same. Bucky tells the Circle that he is not the soldier, a partner, a weapon, or a star point, as those men were Bucky Barnes, and Bucky Barnes is gone. So now he is to be called the New Revolution, and he wishes to play their game now. Sometime later, Bucky looks over a file about the revolution as way back in 1922, Gravillo Princip surveys a battlefield from 4 years prior, asking Fortunoff what he's playing at. Wolf Fortunoff thinks that other nations would soon forget this devastation, but in Latveria, they ensconce their defeats and never forget them. Gavrilo doesn't think that the man has changed since they last met, but Wolf is disappointed that his efforts to save Gravillo from tuberculosis weren't met with more respect. He proclaims that he will not be changed by the world, and like Gravillo showed in Sarajevo, his lot in life is to be the change, and he won't be doing it alone. Wolf introduces his friends to Gravillo, introducing Aiton Argent, the world's first secret multi-billionaire, Ike Aboje, former head of Wakandan engineering, and Anna, a mysterious influential underground artist in Europe. Anna reveals that she had a table made for the meeting, explaining that it was once a tank, but now it's a table. Fortunoff thinks this brings him to a quorum since he's seen the world is in horrible shape and is inspired to find a solution to it, proposing a new map without the current flags or borders. Wolf goes on to explain the concept of the outer circle, and Anna paints it onto the table with the white and black paint she has. Wolf explains that the center will be the people they save, the inner circle is the guns pointed inward for control, and around that is the outer circle, the one with the hands on the levers which makes governments, kept alive by the most advanced technologies to ensure continuity and steering the world towards a brighter future. Gavrilo asks what bright future this is heading towards, and he's seen conspiracy up close and the Black Hand fell apart, so how will Wolf be different? Wolf explains that this isn't a conspiracy, it's a game played by 5 players. 5 who have very different levels of power, all making moves to form a utopia. The rest of the group want to learn the rules of the game, and Wolf dictates that the moves will be made in order, one after the other, and only broadcast to each other in secret. Ike declares that they cannot strike against each other directly and can only influence the world. The group agree, but Gravillo thinks that they are completely insane, since he just watched powerful and influential men kill 20 million over old rivalries, and now they want to do it all again thanks to their egos. He thinks that the game is completely doomed from the beginning, and Franz Ferdinand thought that he had absolute control over everything. But all it took for Gravillo to end that is just a single bullet. Ike proposes then that they utilize a hero as a sword of the state, drawing a star on the painted circle as they decide to use a single star to ensure their cooperation. Gavrilo thinks that this is despotism, asking Wolf if he really is such a megalomaniac that he would spend his entire fortune just to save him and show him this group of oligarchs planning to ruin the 20th century. Wolf reveals that he's not there just to witness it, but he's going to be their 5th member. He explains that he'll be the power, Aiton will be the money, Ike the machine, Anna the love, and Gravillo will be the revolution, the one who will tear them all down. Wolf gleefully announces that the game is afoot, and over the next century, the game is played out until in the present, the power welcomes Bucky as the new revolution. The group discuss Bucky's rise to power, but the hero makes it known that he's not there to play their games, unsheathing his guns and firing on the villains. The Circle all unfortunately have shields, but Bucky wants to see how long they last against his new arm, which is made from a redacted. Power thinks they'll survive just fine since they lasted the last century okay, as the machine restrains Bucky with her tentacles, demanding that he sit back down since his predecessor would send bombs, assassins, armies, and terrorists, and in his own way he also sent Bucky himself after them, but all this is just embarrassing him. She says that the rules are the rules and they are going to get down to business. The Circle talk about the 23rd round of the game being complete with the revolution's death, and while they rebuild the Shadow Capital's ranks and security, they are all to submit their next moves. Machine warns that Steve Rogers has a partial decryption key and remains an unexpected counterweight to their efforts. The Money thinks that the star points are all useless now, but the Love reminds them that the reactor is still active. Machine finds Arnim Zola's rocket display in New York recently embarrassing, and while the site is secure, they soon will be fighting over it. Machine reminds them all that in the end, they all just stand alone from each other. Bucky later goes to his quarters, apologizing to Steve as he pets Alpine. The Love comes to see him, telling him that he has delivered quite a performance so far, and she hopes that he's up to the task. Bucky doesn't care and demands that she leave as the woman pets Alpine, revealing she has a gift for Bucky. The Love says that the box with the gift in it comes with some advice, telling the hero that he's outnumbered as the Power and the Money have formed an alliance, and they believe they can win the game again like they did the previous century. She thinks that the machine is clearly insane, having sacrificed her own child to the game 20 years prior. The love reveals that she has a soft spot for abandoned children like Bucky, and she hates rigged games, wanting to change that. Bucky asks what this has to do with the box, as the woman reveals that in 1967, Rene Magritte made 8 bronze sculptures, each named for a painting he made in his youth, and Bucky now owns the 9th and final work of the artist. Bucky finds it to be a gun whose barrel is bent back facing the shooter, making him wonder if this signifies revolution. He thinks that this is just to gloat over his plans backfiring, but Bucky doesn't care since he's lived his whole life that way and he can do this all day. Alpine suddenly bites the love, causing her to bleed from the arm, as the woman thinks that everything old is new again, and she isn't suggesting that Bucky lives his life in endless pain. She's suggesting that he ponder the nature of his arrangement and spend time reforging the barrel before he fires the gun again. The villain thinks he could learn a thing or two from his cat, as in London, Peggy Carter breaks into an MI6 facility, damning Bucky since he was right the whole time about the Power Elite. Bucky contacts her, wishing that he wasn't right. He reveals to Peggy that he is now part of the conspiracy he warned her about, and this is a warning that he never misses, and they are going to burn her and replace her with a new star point. Peggy thinks that he was sent to kill her, finding that the Circle is more desperate than she thought, but Bucky says that he's actually there because he's at the table now, and he wants her help to flip it. He tells her of some contact lenses he left in a safe nearby, and she is going to be his eyes and ears, keeping him one step ahead of the others so he can burn the place down together with her and light a fire in the shadows, so neither of them can be used like this ever again. Bucky attends a meeting for the next move of the Outer Circle, with the power moving AIM to the Zola reactor, the money crashing the stock market the week before the US election, the machine upgrading the final star point for development, and the love beginning to fuel revolt instead of hope, as Bucky sends Sharon Carter to kill Captain America. In New York, Steve is met by Namor, who has found his shield at the bottom of the ocean he lost when he fell from Shadow Capital. Namor wonders if he wants to challenge him to get it back, but Steve doesn't think that it would be a fair fight in his current state. Namor knows that he once saw Steve tear apart a tank with 7 holes in his chest, so a bug bite of a wound on his arm won't hold him back, and it's not about the wound, it's about how he got it. Namor knows that it's from Bucky's, since the boy doesn't miss. Steve tells his friend that he and Roger Aubrey found a conspiracy, but Namor is more shocked that Dynamite is still alive. Steve tells him about the Outer Circle and how it stretches all the way back to the invaders and even further back than that, and now Bucky has joined them and he keeps looking back and wondering. Namor tells him not to do that since for a century, Steve hasn't changed one bit, since he and Bucky know their enemy and they are the same men, for better or worse, who fought through those battlefields. Namor tells his friends that while he stands for the light, Bucky is in the shadows and is a killer, and Steve is too bright to venture into the shadows, so he needs to let him go. Steve refuses, so his friend tells him then he will need allies who are comfortable going into the dark then, but he's quick to make it known that he doesn't care to help the doomed surface world, and besides, the pressures of the deep have turned him into a diamond and he shines brighter than everyone else. Namor takes his leave and Steve returns to his life, constantly thinking about Bucky missing his shot when he fired on him and how he was really targeting the revolution, and that is what he keeps telling himself, otherwise the pain is too much for him. Roger contacts Steve, who thinks there's been another numbers broadcast, but Roger is sorry to disappoint, but he's got something else. Roger explains that while he's obscenely rich, his people often look into companies for him to acquire, and they have been contacting him in regards to AIM. Steve thinks he knows better than to get involved with them, but Roger knows that, and that's the thing, since his people found nothing, as in there has been no AIM tech whatsoever on the market, meaning it's either all been bought up or something big is being planned. Roger tells Steve that he wants in on this mission, bringing back his old destroyer codename as he reports for duty. Steve knows this is just another fight too big to take on alone, so he eventually goes to Bucky's, finding it completely empty save for a crystal, which he takes, leaving the apartment a few hours later in case Bucky comes home. As he heads home himself, he senses someone following him, so he escapes down an alley and up to his gym, attacking the being following him. He finds the being is Sharon Carter, who he quickly kisses. They catch up over coffee and Sharon reveals that the CIA have been getting a lot of intercepts about Nomad, thinking that Ian is back. Steve reminds her his son is dead, but Sharon wanted to see for herself. Steve tells her about the disagreement he and Bucky had, hence why he's in a sling, but Sharon wants to hear about it after, kissing Steve again. The next morning, Sharon sees Steve as being distant, but he knows that he'll find his way back, despite it hurting so much. As Steve cooks them breakfast, Sharon tends to his shoulder wound. Steve thinks they could spend the day in the park, but Sharon reminds him of the outer circle still in the wind, and Steve is really not just going to let them get away with that, is he? Steve figures he doesn't have a choice since he doesn't know what their next move is. He finds his arm is back in fighting shape as Sharon suggests that she make some calls and build a conspiracy of their own to combat the Circle. The heroes suit up and head into the subway, accessing a hidden hatch on the tracks to an old S.H.I.E.L.D. base, where they meet Nick Fury, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Peggy Carter, Redacted, and Roger. Steve gets to work and tells the team the entire history of his S.H.I.E.L.D.'s origins, the Outer Circle's Sentry game, and his role in it. Nat asks who these people are, but Roger says they only have codenames: Love, Machine, Power, Money, and the Revolution. And the Revolution was just executed, and by rules of the game, his killer takes his seat, and they all know who he is, since Bucky has become the new Revolution. Peggy asks if they know who the other two star points left are, but Steve reveals they have something better, citing Roger's AIM find. Black Widow confirms that AIM is on the move as her contacts went quiet, and Nick thinks that they are cleaning house somehow. Steve reveals the red crystal he found at Bucky's empty apartment, and Nick recognizes it as Neganite, a mineral with real power potential, but it's usually used in zero-G environments thanks to its volatility. Nat really hopes they aren't dealing with aliens or Orchis again, as Peggy and Roger think that they may have seen these rocks before on a mission to Mykonos, and the Iron Sultan in that story wasn't the real villain. He was being controlled by Arnim Zola. Clint reveals that the Thunderbolts have patrols around the city and around the area where Zola's ship launched from in New York recently, but the thing is, it's not all debris like they're being led to believe, as they also found a facility beneath the launch site. Steve wonders when he was going to tell them this, but Clint reminds him that he has a contract with the city and is the only person with a hero license in New York, and he can't just spill classified secrets over the phone. Clint knows that while it's a risk, they can set up a trap in this facility for the Outer Circle, and Redacted thinks it is worth the risk. The team agree to meet in 2 days on Wednesday as they leave the base. Steve finds it good to be heard again, and he knows that the Outer Circle is about to break. He suddenly falls unconscious and wakes up in an instant to a child on a bike asking who he is. He learns from the kid that he's in Baxter Springs, Kansas, asking what day it is. The kid says that it's the best day ever since it's a Friday, as back in New York, the entire lower part of Manhattan has been taken over by AIM. Cap runs to a nearby gas station, wanting to use the phone, but the uncaring man asks for ID, so Steve tells him if he looks like he does need that, since he should be familiar to him. The man notices who he's talking to and gives the hero the phone, as in New York, AIM takes over the lower part of Manhattan, taking thousands hostage as Luke Cage declares a state of emergency. The gas station attendant thinks that Steve is calling about New York, thinking that he should be there. Steve agrees with the man as he says that he thinks he should call the Avengers or the Secret Avengers. Steve thinks that's a good idea, but he calls someone else, telling them where he is and to activate the Captain's network since he's got some friends to find. In New York, Mia, David, and Hudson knock on Steve's door, trying to see if he's home. Amari comes out of his apartment, telling them that he's not there. Mia asks where his parents are, so Amari says that it's just his mother and him, and she was in Queens when the S.H.I.E.L.D. came down around the cities, so she is probably worried to death about him. The group hear AIM soldiers coming up the building searching for Captain America. They bust into his apartment and burn everything inside as the group escape out of the fire escape and onto the street, intending on getting over to the gym and using its bomb shelter in the basement. A soldier spots them, but they overpower him and Amari dishes out a haymaker, knocking him out and impressing the others. He tells them not to consider violence as a first option, but David thinks that a fascist is a fascist, even with a science PhD. More AIM soldiers come and surround the group, capturing them and taking them to the mass gathering of people that are being loaded into trucks. Elsewhere, Steve reunites with his team and Aaron Fisher, the Captain America of the railways. The team find they can't get in contact with Black Widow, and Hawkeye is on high alert in New York and can't leave. Cap knows that he can count on the Captain's network since they are all doing good work around the country, and he's proud to see them wield the shield in ways he never could. Aaron asks what scattered the team, but Fury has no idea, knowing that they are all missing the same 5 days. Steve knows that he was awake and then suddenly in Kansas, like a whole chunk of his mind was just cut out. Sharon reveals that she can feel subdermal scar tissue behind her right ear, and the others can as well. She asks what they are doing about it, so Roger says that they should observe the battlefield since a new soldier has joined, one who can get into their mental negative space. He theorizes about which psychics could do this, and Steve knows that he went to a party with one once, embarrassed to talk about it in front of Sharon. Sharon tells him that he doesn't need to be a monk when she's not around, and he tells her of the suit that was made for the party and that she should see him in it, but Sharon wants to focus him, telling him to stop changing the subject and to call this psychic. Steve knows that all he has to do is think the word loudly, embarrassed because that word is mommy. Emma Frost appears, telling Steve that when she offered him a favor at the Hellfire Gala, she didn't want him to use it for a hobo convention like this, and she finds herself embarrassed. The team really aren't happy having to rely on Emma Frost for this, but with no other choice, the team fill her in on the being in their heads and wanting to know who it is. Emma thinks that she can find them if they bind their minds together, but Peggy refuses to be part of it, signing her mind as her own. Emma assures the others that 5 should be enough, telling the team to close their eyes and to sink into their minds. Almost instantly, Emma discovers that MODOK is the one behind the missing time, only this time, he's not designed for killing, he's designed for control. MODOK freezes the heroes in place, telling them that they will be there for the next several days, so they better get comfortable as he begins cutting out parts of their mind. Emma quickly leaves after revealing who is behind the team's missing time. Steve feels that his mind was mined for its secrets, and Fury knows the villain made it hurt. Sharon fills Peggy in on the new MODOK they face, as Redacted says that the being is the final star point and they need to capture and contain him. Roger hits the wall in frustration and Emma thinks that it's always coming down to punching with them. Emma wishes them all good luck, hoping that Steve doesn't stay a stranger for long and mutants have enough MODOK problems of their own, along with American problems. Later on, Sharon joins Steve on top of a train cart to take in the night sky. Sharon hopes that he's angry as she is, and Steve knows he's furious as he asks what he's looking into the sky for. Steve hopes that he'll see Bucky up there, but he's not coming back. He's playing their game and doing what he can. Steve tells Sharon that they need to stop reacting and the Circle sent their MODOK to unfocus them, but they will stop them where they are. Sharon agrees but asks how they are going to get into Manhattan since it's locked off, but Steve says it's locked off to superheroes, but not them, and this time they will be where they don't want them to be, and this fight doesn't need superheroes, it needs invaders. As the news reports on New York still being held hostage 8 days after the shield came down, Captain America and the invaders blow their way into the shield via train, attacking the AIM forces to secure the Neganite reactor. Peggy asks if Steve remembers a time during the war and how after a hard night in a beer hall with Dum Dum Dugan, they got surprise orders for a rescue in Stuttgart and Dum Dum wasn't happy to be left behind. Peggy knows that it was a hard choice, but Dugan was a liability, but Steve stops her, assuring her that his shoulder is fine. Peggy knows that that's not what she meant, since she wasn't talking about his shoulder, she was talking directly to MODOK. The Destroyer and Sharon meanwhile fight towards AIM command control, and Sharon can see Roger is having a lot of fun smashing crypto-fascists in the face again. The duo wonder how they're going to get to the command hub, and Sharon passes out her microfilament, making Roger question how she's going to get over. Sharon asks the old man how his throwing arm is, as Fury and Redacted take out some soldiers and rescue some hostages. Mia doesn't want to stay quiet, despite Amari telling her that that's Nick Fury, but the hero asks for David, since he knows computers according to Steve. Fury says that America needs his help, and David thinks around there, they just call him Steve. Cap and Peggy meanwhile continue their advance through the AIM soldiers, and Steve asks if Peggy believes he's using violence to deflect his trauma, but he thinks he's just expressing himself kinetically. Peggy assures Steve that she is there for him since Bucky was her friend as well. MODOK continues to try and manipulate Steve's mind, making him feel bad when Peggy said that Bucky was her friend. The heroes find the dig site under Zola's launch pad and get ready to go down, with Peggy commenting that Steve would rather dive into a black pit than talk about all he's going through. Sharon and the Destroyer meanwhile get to the command hub, taking out everyone inside as they casually talk about how Roger got his name Dynamite, telling Sharon that he got it when he was shrunk down to 12 inches by a Nazi scientist, and the name was meant to be a pun on explosives since he was a trained sapper during the war. He says he found he loved Brian more, so when he got back to normal size, he combined his love into a mission statement and became the Destroyer, but it's not a name really, it's a promise. The team blow up the hub as Nick and Redacted are filled in by Hudson on the AIM's rally points. Fury tells the group to use the information David dug up on the AIM detainment routes to get out of the city unseen, but Amari refuses to hide. However, Fury tells him that Captain America would very much like to know they are safe and sound. Mia knows that Fury was sent there knowing very well what David could find, and Arlo agrees that Steve would want them to save lives, not hide. David reveals that AIM is taking all of the people to Madison Square Garden as Steve and Peggy descend down the pit. Peggy says that while the others know him as an icon, she knows him as Steve Rogers and knows that he is in denial as MODOK continues to try and manipulate Steve's mind, filling it with doubt. Peggy implores Steve to let Bucky go since he's not a boy anymore. He's a man who made a choice and now he's his enemy. Bucky, who has been listening in the entire time, tells Peggy to tell him word for word what he says. So Peggy tells Steve that Bucky isn't the broken one, the world is, and they need to think of the systems in place to help people and the ones who leave those same people in the dark. As Fury's team move into Madison Square Garden, Peggy tells Cap that Bucky has joined the Outer Circle to get through these systems and tear the world's dark, old, rotting heart out, and it means that someone like him will need to build a new heart. The skies darken as MODOK is deployed from the Shadow Capital, which appears over the city. Sometime before, MODOK is going about his mission to win over Dr. Simeon when suddenly his mind explodes and MODOK is activated. As in the present, he reveals himself to the invaders, accessing their minds again as he reveals that the power has made it to the Neganite reactor and the heroes have failed this scenario 4 times in their heads in the span of only a few minutes. He loves that every time that he does this, they always act surprised as MODOK reveals that all of the heroes are unconscious and connected to him, wanting to play their invasion of New York City again for his own pleasure. The power doesn't care what MODOK does with them, only that the heroes are kept down, as in Steve's mind, Steve is confronted by the Winter Soldier, knowing that this is just another MODOK mind game and the villain thinks that him reliving this day will break him. MODOK, through Bucky, tells Steve that all he needs to do is step aside and Steve tells him just to get it over with. Bucky shoots him as Sharon sees Cap telling her not to shoot since she is a good person and she doesn't have to be a weapon anymore. MODOK again tries to convince her to kill Steve and she fires her gun at the hero. Roger meanwhile sees himself in a pub with Brian, told by the MODOK illusion that he loves him. The men escape the pub as Nazis burst in and kill everyone, setting it on fire, but Brian soon leaves Roger all alone. Nick Fury meanwhile remembers his friend being shot during the war, asking MODOK if he thinks this is all funny to him. MODOK doesn't want to see him waste his anger on him when the real killers are right there, showing Nick the suits who filed the orders leading to his friend's death. But Nick knows that they didn't put the bullet in his head. MODOK thinks they are all dogs who need to be leashed, wondering if Nick Fury really thinks he should be the one holding said leash. Redacted meanwhile sees flashes of his creation, seeing a young man with his brain cut open and a brood alien as MODOK tells him that he's remembering things he shouldn't, and being something when he is meant to be nothing. The villain thinks that he can do something about that as Peggy is told that she is an unexpected intermission here, since she is one of the final star points, just like MODOK. The villain thinks that both their missions are quite at odds with each other, and he reveals that the power has given him free reign on hurting her and the others, and to edit her memories of the lives and stories she has. He shows her a story of Sharon holding a firework for too long when she was 13, almost blowing her hand off. Peggy reminds him he has Roger Aubrey in his mind as well, and that man is only one thing: dynamite. The Power meanwhile finishes setting up his operation in Lower Manhattan, knowing that the Revolution is listening, watching with bated breath to see how his gambit plays out. Bucky feigns ignorance, not knowing what the Power is talking about, as the Power reveals that he left the Neganite for Steve to find in his apartment, as he reveals his own medallion, using his magic to rip open the ground and carve symbols into the earth, unearthing a device which the AIM scientists pull to the surface. Power is delighted that Revolution is learning to play the game, and he's thrilled to see he's so bad at it. MODOK meanwhile wants to run the game again for the heroes, but Roger refuses to play, telling MODOK that he is going to regret this because he took the face of the only man he ever loved, and while it's been decades since Brian died, he's the only person who reminds him every day how far he's willing to resist, and MODOK didn't cage him, he inspired him. Roger smashes out of his illusion, freeing Peggy and Redacted before fighting with Nick Fury through his illusion to free Sharon and finally Steve. The invaders take the fight to MODOK, freeing themselves from the villain's control as the Destroyer wishes to have a little chat with the downed villain. He demands to know where the Power is, telling the shocked villain that he escaped since his mind has been sharpened against the whetstone of fascism for nearly a century. He demands MODOK call his master and tell him the invaders are coming for him, so MODOK does just that, telling the Power that he has failed. The Power thinks that it's time to call in the other one as MODOK reverts back to his killer form, obliterating the Destroyer as Cap pulls Sharon away from the battlefield and from certain death. Bucky watches Roger Aubrey get killed by MODOK as Cap pulls Sharon back, telling her Roger is dead and they don't have to be. Sharon tells Steve that she's going to kill MODOK for what he did, and Steve doesn't doubt it, as he'll take on the power while the invaders take on MODOK. The team fight in the name of Roger as Steve confronts the power, demanding that he surrender the Neganite, but the villain uses his power to take control of Steve's shield, proclaiming that it's their weapon and they'll be taking it back. Steve notices the magic and the Latavarian accent, thinking that he's fought his type before and it didn't go well for him either. The power knows that Dr. Doom chases power, but he is the power, and Captain America is just an outmoded product with a long obsolete symbol. The hero says that the symbol isn't his, it's the Circle's, since he's just Steve and that's all he needs to be to take them down. MODOK meanwhile gleefully fights the invaders, not able to wait for the high he's going to get from killing them all. Bucky contacts Peggy, telling her that this wasn't part of the plan, but he can help, telling her an override code for MODOK. The woman subvocalizes the code and MODOK is pulled back into his larger damaged MODOK body, calling the heroes cheaters. Sharon tells him to shut up and to try and kill them, so the villain comes for them, planning on ripping them apart from the inside, but Redacted meets him in the air, telling him that entering their mind again is a mistake, since out there it would have been a fair fight, but they have been just invited back to a familiar battlefield, and the invaders blow apart MODOK, destroying the villain as the heroes join Captain America against the power. The power proclaims that Captain America's name tastes like disgust in his mouth. He orders Steve to die as Cap leaps onto his controlled shield, telling the villain that he doesn't care for his condescension, and thanks to missing most of the 20th century, he's had to play catch up, and he has every day of his life since, and the one thing he's learned is that there is power in not changing, especially if you are a decent person. Cap reveals that the shield he is on has been conserving the momentum he threw it at the power with, and with the power stopping it with his magic, he has just concentrated it, and thanks to Steve distracting him, he has lost his control on it. The shield slams hard into the power's face, as Steve tells him that while it's the Circle symbol, it's his shield. The power is finally defeated, but Steve knows that there are 4 left, calling out for Bucky and telling him that Roger Aubrey is dead, and Bucky was the one who sacrificed him like a pawn. Bucky tells Steve that Roger made his choice, and so did Steve, who thinks that it's all a lie, since when Bucky left him the Neganite in his apartment, he knew what Steve would do. Bucky thinks that he did it perfectly, thanking Steve for his part in the game, but now he needs to stay out of his business. Steve screams to the heavens for his friend to come back as the power is teleported back up to the capital, which begins moving out from New York. Steve goes to see Sharon, who wants to know what the point of Bucky burning Roger's life in front of them was, since even with all his money and power now, he still liked to burn Roger. Steve hugs Sharon, and 1 week later, the team enjoy a barbecue. Nick asks if Sharon is sticking around, and Sharon confirms that she is. Something that Nick doesn't like, since she and Steve don't really bring the best out in each other, and Nick reminds her that after what Bucky did, Steve is going to need some caring. Sharon knows that he has no right to talk to her like that as the barbecue goes up in flames. David meanwhile continues to take down the proxy numbers, but Hudson tells him to enjoy the party they're at. David says that his videos on the Circle are there to share the truth and they can shut down the entire internet, but it won't kill the truth he is trying to out. Peggy asks where Steve is as the hero is talking with Redacted inside. Redacted thinks that he's still recovering from his wounds, and Steve tells him that without him taking the shots, he wouldn't be alive. Redacted wants to rest now, but when he awakens, he wants to talk to Steve about maybe getting a name for himself. Peggy watches from the window outside, relaying the information to Bucky and telling him that Starpoint Redacted is off the board and Phase 2 is ready to go. Mia comes to meet with Steve, wanting to thank him for saving them all, hoping that no one has said that yet. Steve tells her that no one actually has yet, but she is very welcome. Later on, Sharon compliments Steve's choice of friends as Steve wants to talk to her about something he wants to do, telling her he wants to rebuild the apartment, but not like how it was before, but maybe something that could be their own place. Sharon is happy to hear it, getting an idea of how much Steve really loves her, as he hears a knock at the door. Sharon goes to see who it is, telling Steve that it's not Amari like he thought it was. At the door is Ian, Steve's son, who thinks it's been a long time since he's seen his father.